So this is a video about mistakes I've made, if that isn't obvious enough. I guess the first mistake I'd like to share is one I made in my not as controversial as I thought it would be video where I talked about a bunch of cartoon reviewers, and I said that Velisca94 started YouTubing after Rebel Taxi, but while I'm not sure if that's accurate or not, what I can say is that my basis was faulty because I used the date of his main channel's creation, not really taking into consideration the fact that he had created other channels before that, so yeah, that was dumb of me and I regret saying that. The next, I suppose you could call dud. It's really more so lack of perspective than anything. In my Bakugan video, I pointed out the fact that the series aired 52 episodes in the same year, and I expressed how overly long it was. Now, back then, I wasn't all that familiar with the many ways anime shows can be released, and now I know that this isn't as outrageous as I thought it was. There are plenty of shows that have done this, some of them even more excessively than Bakugan, so yeah, my bad. Speaking of Bakugan, I might as well address this criticism I've received several times in my video where I reviewed the game based on it. Some people have pointed out that the rules of the games are more so inspired by the real-life Bakugan card game than the anime. Now, I can't confirm if this is true or not, but I will acknowledge that I haven't played the real-life card game and I didn't take this into account when I played the PS2 game, which I would have done so if I knew more about it. That being said, I don't think this really changes my opinion all that much, especially because this game is very clearly based off the anime. It has the characters and logos on the cover, it has a story mode featuring the same music, same opening, same elements of the story, the characters, the designs. This is very clearly marketed to attract fans of the anime, and while I get that some of them might have also played the card game and wouldn't be bothered by the changes made in the mechanics to resemble it more, I'm bothered though. I don't like the changes made at all. You could say I'm biased, which is entirely correct, but I honestly would have been more hyped for the game if the experience of playing it felt more like the anime, because that's the version of the game I'm the most attached to. But hey, to each their own. So the next mistake is one I've made in at least 2 videos, and I'm gonna be real, this might be the most embarrassing one. You see, when people misuse terms, it's usually because they aren't all that familiar with it, but this term is actually one that I was very familiar with and knew exactly what it meant, but for some reason got it in my head that it meant something else entirely in the realm of film discussion. I'm of course talking about the term set piece, which for whatever reason I was interpreted hyper literally even though I played FIFA. I've designed set pieces for free kicks and corners several times during training. I have no idea why it didn't occur to me that it would have a similar meaning in film production. Honestly, every time I revisit my old videos and listen to myself misusing that term, a part of me dies. It's really embarrassing. Now to something a little less disgraceful but still really dumb. In my review of the Teen Titans franchise crossover movie, at some point I stated that the '03 Titans were designed to be in darker color palettes, but I actually underestimated how bright the 2003 Teen Titans cartoon actually was. I think this was because I was basing my image of the series off of memories of watching episodes of it with shittier picture quality. This was before the widescreen HD version became a lot more accessible, and those old footages do make the series come off as darker than it actually is. I even noticed that while I was editing the video and putting together the clips, but I didn't really put much thought into it. Now despite that, I still think the '03 Titans look really pale since they don't share the same digital texture as the entirety of Teen Titans Go, so they still end up looking ugly and misplaced, just not for the reasons that I stated in the video. Now let's get to my favorite segment. So the next mistake is one that, to be honest, I don't know if it's actually a mistake. This one is a relatively recent video as well, which is the one where I clowned on Crunchyroll and Netflix for having really fucking questionable attempts at localization. The one mistake I made was when I criticized Crunchyroll for translating Onigoko to hide and seek. For a while, I was sure this was a misstep on CR's part, but when I was researching for footage of Girls in Panzer, I wanted episodes that had no subtitles. So I went with the dub versions, and what I ended up finding out while skimming through them was that the dub version also had the character saying hide and seek. This really confused me and also made me feel a little bit regretful because I'd only paid attention to this after I'd finished editing and uploading the videos. So Regardless of what this actually meant, if this was an indication of anything important, I could have taken this into account when I wrote the video. Nevertheless, despite this being some degree of evidence that I could have been in the wrong, simply because it's one thing for one subber to be wrong, but when a dub company makes the same exact mistake, maybe it's not actually a mistake. But despite that, I couldn't believe that I was wrong. I've always had it in my head based on my own observations that hide and seek translate to Kakurenbu and that Onigoku is actually tagged. So was I just wrong all this time? I did some digging online and none of the information I saw contradicted my understanding. Almost everyone seemed to agree with me. That was, of course, until I read 2 different articles that mysteriously translated Onigoku to hide and seek, which was weird. I felt a little bit insecure, but also completely baffled and confused. But eventually, I read this website called Taikei Japan that probably did the best to explain where the confusion lies. You see, Onigoku does in fact mean tag, but there are different variations of tag, one of them being Kakure Oni, which is basically Kakurenbu. The main similarity between Kakurenbu and Onigoku is that there is always someone who's defined as Oni, which means it. In hide and seek, the person who's it is the one who has to search for the people who are hiding. In tag, you just have a guy who's going around chasing everyone. So if Kakurenbu is just simply a variation of Onigoku, which is what this website seems to imply, then I guess in a way I can sort of understand why some people would define hide and seek as Onigoku, since it's technically a part of the same category of children games. Now, with all of this, I still believe the translation was wrong, and let me explain why. You see, in the beginning of this episode, the main characters had just found out that the opposing team hijacked the radio interceptor balloon and were listening to all the conversations they were having through their phones installed in their tanks. So to counteract this, they took advantage of this by using the tank phones to give the enemies the impression that they were going in one direction, but in reality they were somewhere else entirely, and they were secretly using their own personal mobile phones to exchange text to set up their actual strategies. Now, while this was happening, one of the allies accidentally crossed with an enemy, specifically Alisa, which at first seemed like a problem, but earlier in the episode, Miho said that she needed someone to serve as a decoy, so they took advantage of the specific ally to lead Alisa to a location where they had a number of tanks ready to counterattack, and the enemy wouldn't know that they were there because they didn't communicate that through the phones installed in their tanks. However, in order for Alisa to be in that location, the ally had to be chased and eventually lead her to the trap location. And then later, after they arrived there, Alisa inevitably became the one being chased since it was 5 against 1, and that was when the blonde spectator made the comment that this resembled Onigoku. The thing is, I don't know about you, but this sounds a lot more like tag than hide and seek. Yes, the main characters were technically hiding, but the way hide and seek works is that the person who's it has to find everyone knowing fully well that they're hiding. The enemy wasn't going around trying to find everyone who were just doing nothing by hiding. All Allison knew was that they supposedly went to Platoon 128 to reestablish their offenses. For it to be hide and seek, there would have to be some kind of expectation that the people hiding want to maintain hidden until they eventually get caught, but they're not supposed to stay hidden in the platoon forever. Eventually, they would have to attack the enemies. And even though that's not where they actually went, they still ended up confronting their opponent as they exposed themselves once Alisa arrived in point 0615. That is, of course, unless you're basing this off of another variation of hide and seek, which is actually the one I grew up with, in which the hider has to run to the home base so that they won't get tagged by the seeker. But since there is no home base in this context, and again, no matter how often the player keeps themselves away from the enemy's reach, there's still an expectation that they will unavoidably engage in battle and eliminate one another. It says to me that this version of hide and seek doesn't really apply to this episode. If anything, this seems a lot more like tag when you start to think about it, because Alisa was literally chasing someone as if she was Oni, or it, and then later she was the one being chased as if the other side were now the ones who were it. This is what tag is all about. The person who's it changes frequently whenever the players get tagged, and the Onigoku comment was made exactly after the chase was diverted. So yeah, I personally still think she meant tag, but if you have an argument for why the situation could have been interpreted as hide and seek, I'd like to know. Anyway, there are probably way more mistakes I've made, so don't be surprised if this isn't the last video on the subject. Feel free to suggest some more mistakes I've made, and hell, even if I don't think they're mistakes, if there's an opportunity for me to clarify on something, that would make for an interesting video. Anyway, goodbye.